LGBT people were singled out by the Home Secretary.
Okay, Alicia Kearns, good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Just one thing, I know it's an area where you take an interest. So today, the issue of gender ID, rights, restrictions, it's going to be one of the big issues on the platform. General terms, what's your thought on that?
So look, we have to have discussions, particularly where they're difficult. Often when conversations are difficult, it means there's a legitimacy to those discussions. But all I'm asking for is that we show respect, particularly to vulnerable communities who are increasingly being victimised when they shouldn't be because of the narratives, the way that media or others or politicians are talking about them. We have to just have compassion and decency and respect. There are sometimes conflicts between different groups, but we must be able to, as policymakers, find a solution without making the situation more heated.
And is that what's happening now? Are we seeing efforts from senior ministers in the cabinet which are effectively making this issue more heated than it needs to be? Is that your view?
Look, I worry about it. So look, let's talk about immigration, for example. We all know there are people who are fabricating their reasons for supposedly being legitimate asylum seekers. We know that not least from media stings where they have caught people who are saying, for 100 grand, I'll work out a fake story for you, 10k, I'll get you into this country, let's create a fake narrative. But at the same time, LGBT people were singled out by the Home Secretary. When you look at the figures, in 2021, only 1.5% of all asylum applications reference sexuality. How are we worried about the 1.5% when the other vast majority is actually what we should be looking at? And that, for me, is a kind of example where why are we singling out LGBT people when we should be focusing on the vast majority?
Well, I mean, you'd have seen Priti Patel, your party colleague, a former Home Secretary, on the right of the party. She suggested that Suella Braverman was making the points that she did to get attention. Do you agree with that?
Look, I mean, the reality of politics is that it is about having a discussion, and sometimes you do need to force headlines, but it should never be at the cost or at the expense of an individual, let alone a vulnerable community. And
you believe that crossed that line?
I think it did cross the line because there was no data. It wasn't data-driven, it wasn't accurate, it wasn't based on the majority problem either that we are facing.
Right, so that's the question of asylum rights for gay people and as well as women. Today we're going to be hearing about from the Health Secretary. He's telling us that he wants to stop trans women on certain wards, women's wards. Now, it's going to grab some headlines. What do you think?
So there are legitimate safeguarding concerns there. And this is the point. So look, I have always said, from the day I was elected, that, for example, in prisons, if you were in prison for a sexually motivated crime, you should not be allowed to transition while you're in prison. Right. And I worked at the Ministry of Justice, and we did know that some men would claim that they were transitioning because they thought they would get better treatment or that being in a women's prison was easier than being in a men's. Actually, I think women's prisons are one of the most depressing places I've ever been in my life. So look, there are legitimate discussions to be had, and in health settings, there are legitimate safeguarding questions that need to be had because it's about where people are on their journeys, where they are in terms of transitioning. We need to make sure that it safeguards everyone.
Right. The Health Secretary, for example, is saying he's clamping down on wokery, woke thinking.
It's very difficult. Is there a push to minimise the concerns of women when it comes to safeguarding? Sometimes there is. But on the other side, do I receive a lot of hostility from people who want to misrepresent my position and claim that I'm somehow woke when it comes to transgender rights? It's very clear. Let people live their lives freely until they hurt someone or put someone at risk or there is a legitimate safeguarding concern.
In the case of healthcare, we've seen literature, we've seen boards in hospitals which do not wish to refer to women as women. The exclusively female conditions are not referred to as such, and it causes some irritation.
It does, and look, I breastfeed. I didn't chest feed. I would never accept it if a health clinician started talking to me about chest feeding. I would say, look, I'm really sorry, but I'm a woman and I breastfeed, and I want you to use that. If a trans person comes in tomorrow, by all means use the word chest feeding while talking to them. We need to be inclusive but not exclusionary in our efforts to be inclusionary. And it's a balance and it's difficult, but that's why we are made to be policymakers, to make those legitimate, difficult decisions in a respectful way.
Okay, so that's health. When it comes to home affairs, the brief of the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, she's rather on the warpath on some of these issues. Is she entitled to be?
So look, I think we absolutely have the entitlement to be very angry about illegal migration. It goes to the heart of fairness, which I think is one of the most core values of all British people, but it's a danger issue. The Home Office has responsibility for security. I spent 4 months in Greece helping people land safely. I have seen what happens. I have seen these traffickers. I've seen the fake life jackets they put on people. I've seen the dead bodies. These are gangs that need to be dealt with. So of course, should she be having, on the warpath against gangs? Absolutely.
I can sense a but.
Yeah. No, it's just that there is a wide discussion about immigration that is being mixed with illegal migration. So, for example, you've seen Conservative MPs come out yesterday saying that we want to get immigration down to 200,000. The people of Britain, when they voted to leave the European Union, a lot of that was about control of our borders, but not arbitrary targets. I think it's really important that we separate illegal migration from legitimate migration, where actually we have needs. With the AI summit coming up, we want AI experts coming to work in our country. We have workforce gaps that we need to fill.
Okay, now lastly, what's then your message to the Home Secretary when it comes to the tone, the style in which she addresses these questions?
Look, we have a duty to lead, we have a duty to ask the difficult questions, but I think we can always do so in a respectful manner and a way that hopefully brings people with us.